The Unrelating podcasts are meant to be for education and entertainment. They don't constitute a service or advice. For personal struggles, please reach out to a medical or mental health professional.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey, Kel. How's it going?
Good. Just to point out, Michelle, you're on vacation today, so we're catching you not in your normal place.
Yes, I'm out in the wild, not in my natural habitat, just taking a beat to be with family, enjoy some summertime fun, but I will always stop whatever I'm doing to come and be with you. So,
Is this going to be helpful for your mental health, like doing this little vacation? Are you going to walk away from it and feel refreshed?
Yeah, basically the moment I ever leave for vacation, my brain becomes pudding and I'm fine with that. I'm not someone who needs to go to have big adventures. I'm like, vacation is wear the same outfit every day, pajamas, and read and relax and be a vegetable on the couch. That's my jam.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always restorative for me because I don't get the opportunity to do that in everyday life.
Speaking of restorative, and speaking of break, it's summer break for teachers out there right now. Michelle, growing up, did you have a favorite teacher or principal?
I couldn't even tell you who the principals were of the schools I went to, but I definitely had favorite teachers. I could name them even to this day through elementary, middle school, high school. But yeah, what's interesting is I had one of my favorite teachers, his name was Mr. Curry in middle school, really brought out a love of acting and theater in me. But he was also like the history teacher. And, I don't know, he was just very serious, but also very kind. And I'll never forget him. And then he became the principal a few years after we left middle school. So that's interesting. I wonder how that shifted him. I was kind of bummed because I'm like, sure, be a principal, but you were a really great teacher. Now kids aren't going to get to have you as a teacher.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, today's guest, we're going to talk to somebody who was a teacher and then became a principal.
Yeah. And, many shows could be made on the challenges teachers face. I'm particularly excited to speak to our guest because she just has a lot of different perspectives as a teacher, as an administrator, and she's someone who even to this day is trying to cultivate learning in other people. And so clearly there's a passion there.
Welcome to Unrelating with Kel Michelle, and I'm one of your hosts, Kelly. With me is my co-host Michelle, a licensed marriage and family therapist who's been providing individual and couples therapy for over 2 decades. Together, we'll explore how we engage in relationships, why we do what we do, and what causes people to unrelate.
So welcome, Joan, to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Joan is a retired principal from Michigan. Tell us about your background.
So I grew up in a household that my parents did not go to college, but my mom was an organist at our church, and she was also a private piano teacher after school. So I listened to my mom teach every day after school in utero until I moved out and went to Olivet. And so I went to Olivet College in Michigan, got my degree in music education and also in psychology, thinking I might go into music therapy. But I never did, and was very fortunate to get hired right out of college as a vocal music teacher in the Kalamazoo Public Schools. I did my student teaching here in Kalamazoo, and the gal who I did my student teaching with retired. And she had one of those, quote, better schools. And so somebody, of course, went in and got her position, and I was low man on the totem pole. And so I took the elementary school that was left. But it was a wonderful experience. I taught there for 6 years. I didn't try and get out as soon as I could. And I taught kindergarten through 6th grade. And for 10 years, decided to get my master's in ed leadership. And I was told while I was working on my ed leadership that I needed to get in the classroom. There were many principals back in the old day that you could do art, music, PE, and then be a principal. But because of all the benchmarks and standards, they encouraged me to do classroom teaching. So then I taught 5th grade for 5 years. And the bad part about that is I only knew 26 students. I didn't know everybody in the building. And I really missed that. I loved doing the assemblies with all the children. I loved knowing the parents and being part of PPO, going to the roller skating parties. And so I only taught 5th grade. I knew those children really, really well. but I didn't know everybody else. So that's when I decided, okay, I guess you really do want to do this principal thing. And I was the first principal in Kalamazoo that went from the classroom to being the leader of that same school.
What?
The philosophy had been, it's really hard to have someone go into leadership when their peers and their classrooms around them had been peers. And now you have to evaluate them. And so I was principal at that building for 6 years. That's how I got into ed leadership and became a principal, because I really liked doing the morning announcements. I loved greeting the children off the bus. I loved setting the tone for the day. I always went into the cafeteria. I was always present. And even in my little building where there was only 300 students, every day I went into every single classroom. And growing up, I had the mindset I did not want the principal, Mr. McBride, to know my name. But when I became a principal, I wanted every child to know that I knew their name and I knew where they lived. Yeah.
And not because they were in trouble, but because you actually cared to know who they were.
Yeah.
Correct. So when they got off the bus, I would call them by name. Mm-hmm.
Joan, you mentioned that people say you shouldn't be the principal when you were working with your peers prior, and then you spent 4 years at that school. Do you still agree with that perspective, or do you think it's possible?
Well, it is possible. And I think it went really well, Michelle, because we were doing a renovation at the time, and I was already enamored with that school. I wanted it to succeed. And I was there all summer long while construction was going on. And then I helped. And there was one teacher who I was very close to, and we always talked on Sunday nights. And our thing was, we'll still talk on Sunday nights because we can't talk during the school day. We didn't want people to feel as if she had a leg up on everybody else. But my evaluations were all fair. They were above board. So in the end, Michelle, to answer your question, there were other folks who went from the classroom into leadership in the same building for that reason, because they already knew the culture. They already knew the families. And so you weren't starting from scratch. And sometimes it's good to have somebody else come from the outside in, and then sometimes it's great to promote from within.
Not much different than, the business world, where you see a lot of people get promoted from within as managers, and then they're managing their their peers as well. So it's not that uncommon. So I think it's good for morale, certainly.
Well, it speaks, I think, to Joan being well respected among her peers, because if that transition.
Yes. And when I went to Woods Lake, because it was a magnet school for the arts, any child who lived in the district could go to that school. And sometimes if a child wasn't being real wonderful in their previous building, they'd say, well, do you like music? Do you like to dance? Maybe you'd like to go to this school. And then I would get an influx of these children. And I also would give tours to parents if they were considering coming to our building. And one parent sat down with me and she asked, so since you've been principal, how many teachers have decided to transfer out of your school? And I went, oh my gosh, nobody has ever asked me that question. It's always, how much do you have this or this or this or this? And, how many A's do you have on the playground? But I had never heard that question. And I told her, I said, I've never been asked that question. And I said, I'm very happy to announce 0 teachers have ever transferred out of my school.
It's a great data point.
Unfortunately, I got some teachers who were transferred to me because other administrators were trying to give them a second chance someplace else, just like those children that came to my school. But if they didn't have a plan of assistance, then I would put them on a plan and I would carry through.
You should get a plaque on your desk that says that, no teachers have left my school or whatever.
Well, and then some of them, they went on to middle school or they went into, another field. But as far as getting away from my culture or my style of leadership, that did not happen.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of what is the adage? No good deed goes unpunished, because when you show an aptitude in your field for, working with kids that are maybe more challenged or having issues, then suddenly you're the go-to. You're the one they want to send all of the children to, because Yeah, it's like the better you do with the more difficult cases, the more they pile on.
Well, we used to call those
It probably
children.
feels that way for a lot of teachers.
It is. And when we did class lists, to be honest, we always tried to balance. And I always asked for the teachers for input as to who was in what classroom, because they knew the children even better than I did. And we would try really hard not to stack the deck with the zingers, is what we called them, because it wasn't fair to give 6 or 7 challenging children to one teacher and 0 to the next because they were not as effective.
So how long were you principal total, Joan?
10 years. So I did 10 years in music, 5 years in classroom, and then 10 years as principal. My husband had early onset Alzheimer's, and so I retired in 2008 to care for him, and he passed away in 2012.
Oh,
So I was fortunate. I was able to buy 5 years to have my 30 years. And then after he passed away, I started working at Western with student teachers. And I did some subbing. I wasn't totally out of it, but yeah, it was just too demanding of a job to do with his illness.
I'm sorry to hear that. Do you think you ever go back?
No, not after COVID. I watched friends and colleagues trying to do the whole online thing. And like I showed you, Kelly, is I am so paper pencil that everything they do now and all the technology they have in the classroom. Even subbing, I would go in and a teacher might say to me, I'm having difficulty with my projector screen. Can you? I was like, no, I don't do that. I can come in and help you teach, but I need a whiteboard or I need a book. But the whole technology piece, there are other ways that I can use my passion for education in other ways.
Yeah, I can't think of a better legacy than teaching student teachers, the next generation, giving them a strong foundation.
Absolutely. I really enjoyed that. And the first semester I did that, Michelle, I had 10 student teachers, and 2 of them were zingers, and they knew that. And when they assigned them to me, because I had been, many of the folks who do that for Western have been in the classroom, but they haven't been administrators. And so I brought a different package to the plate by working with the student teachers. And 2 of them I had to fail because I said, if I would not hire you, I can't pass you. And my question back to Western was, how did they get this far? That nobody counseled them out of education before now because they were devastated. And one of them went on and had a second chance. They gave them a different facilitator from Western, and he passed. The other gal took it to heart, and she got out. But her big thing was, but I'm here all the time. I try so hard. And I said, I'm having a hard time following your lessons. If I'm having a hard time following your lessons, no matter how hard you try, those 5 and 6-year-olds can't follow your lessons. And so I gave her every opportunity, and her mentor teacher said, thank you, because she was telling her the same thing. But when it came down to it, to her final evaluation, I said, if I cannot hire you, I cannot pass you. And so she left.
You probably did her, obviously, your advice probably helped her quite a bit, I would imagine.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
It's funny because I was telling Michelle this. I met this guy, and he's actually going through school to be a teacher, and I think he was subbing at the time. But I said, look, man, I think it's great. First of all, it's good to see more men get into the field of teaching. Secondly, the fact that he was just so excited about it, I'm like, that to me it gives me hope, that to see this from a 22-year-old guy who normally you would think would be playing video games, but he was really into helping, work with kids. So I thought that was really inspiring.
You have to be passionate. I still get nightmares about teaching. And I've been retired for 17 years. But there isn't a month that doesn't go by that I don't have when I was teaching music. My nightmare was that I was looking for my choir, and I'm going through the halls of the building looking for them, and I can't find them. And it's our time to perform, and I can't find them. The other one is when I was a principal, is that I've got 600 children and 0 buses show up. What do I do with these kids? So, that, it's innate when you dream about it, 17 years after you retire that. And I remember the first year when I retired, it was pouring down rain, and I was looking at my watch thinking, oh my gosh, those kids are going to get soaked standing out at the bus stop. It's no longer my responsibility that they're getting wet standing out at the bus stop.
Your example of the 22-year-old or the 20-year-old who's guy who's going into teaching, it makes me think, Joan, you have so much wisdom from all your experience, and young people are feeling really disillusioned about going into teaching. Is there anything you could say that would help them hold on to that excitement or motivation, even though they know going in it's going to be hard?
They're just another good story I have is a student that was one of those zingers that came to Chime, my first building, has very unsuccessful. And in fact, the parents had to drop him off to school and pick him up because he couldn't ride the bus. And every day we had lunch together because I couldn't trust him out on the playground. And so I had a goldfish and he died. I got a new goldfish and I named him after him. And he was, I can't believe you're naming your goldfish after me. And I said, well, every day when you come in for lunch, it's your responsibility to feed him. And all of a sudden he had this responsibility. It wasn't just a punishment to come and sit and have lunch with me. And as he got older, and my son was a police officer in Kalamazoo Public Safety, my son would have run-ins with him. And it'd be, don't tell your mom. Please don't tell your mom. And it was all about getting back to Miss Weldon that, now he's disappointed in me, or vice versa, that I would be disappointed in him and his choices because I had such an investment. And he was just one of hundreds in my building. But I made students wear lanyards with their names on them because it used to be, I know you're in so-and-so's room, get back and do what you're supposed to do. And I told my teachers, you need to know each child's name. And if they wear their lanyard, you're more apt to learn their name. And then you're going to call them by name. Why are you, so-and-so? Kelly, why are you putting your hands on Michelle? Is that a choice that we make at Westlake School? What choice should you be making? Mm-hmm. So we would practice all of these dialogues. And by knowing the children's names, and the children would say, so-and-so called me out. And I'd say, well, who was it? Because the teachers had to wear their name tags. And then they could tell me. And then I'd have a conversation with that teacher. So the responsibilities went both ways.
Yeah, sounds like it.
You were also really trying to cultivate relationships within, just making sure everybody felt connected to everyone else.
How do teachers nurture that relationship further? And how do they build that trust with kids, especially nowadays, do you think?
When I taught fifth grade, I called every parent before school started because I didn't want the first phone call that I made to be, hi, I'm your child's teacher, and they really messed up in school today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So before school started, I had my class list, and I called every single parent before school started. So that when I did have to call them, they'll say, remember, and I kept a spiral notebook, and each child was at the top of the page. And every time I called, or if they came to parent-teacher conferences, or they sent in cookies, or they sent in a box of Kleenex, I wrote that underneath that child's name. So that when I did have a phone call with a parent, or they would come in and say, you never called me when they so-and-so. And I say, well, you know what? I did. I called you a week ago Tuesday and 2 Tuesdays before that. And then I tried on a Friday and you didn't return my phone call. So it's not like I haven't tried calling you before. So I documented everything I did. Mm-hmm. And that was, so building a relationship with a parent is getting to meet them first. They also saw me out and about in the community. I lived in the Kalamazoo area, so worship there, shop there, and I always tried to make myself approachable when I would see families out and about. I wouldn't hide. Just like when I ring bells for Salvation Army. I love it when former children come up to me and say, I remember you. It's a great feeling.
And that's how you build trust, is to feel familiar and safe.
Yes. One of my students used to fall asleep, and I called the parent and I said, I found out today that so-and-so doesn't have their own bedroom to sleep in. And the problem is that you're staying up too late watching television, and they sleep on the living room couch.
Yeah.
And that conversation was easier to have because we already had a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did they react to that?
Well, not as positively as I would have hoped, Kelly.
Yeah.
But at least they knew I was concerned and that I wasn't placing blame or judgment, but just that their child wasn't producing as well in the classroom.
It brings up a good point. How do teachers walk that fine line where they maybe see issues with it? You mentioned lack of sleep, which certainly is important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's other issues where you're seeing things concern you as not only as a teacher but as a parent. What do you do? Like, what's that look like?
That's a good question. You do the best you can. You can't take them all home with you.
Yeah.
There are days that you want to just bundle them up. And the other big one was lice. Lice was something that families
Yep.
would have over and over. And I would do multiple head checks. And, you give them the tools, but you can't make them do it. And you don't judge. And you tell them, and if it's a discipline issue, Kelly, then I would say, can you tell me what you do at home to be helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, what we're trying here at school isn't working, and no corporal punishment is not allowed. But can you and try and bring the parent on board as well? So hopefully, then at home, that checklist that maybe the child would be on that has to be signed will get a better return. Because the parent will say, I know Miss Weldon's trying really hard with you, and you didn't get all your points today. And when they used to come into my fifth grade room, all of their names were on the whiteboard and they would sign in from 1 to 10. And most students would be a 9 or a 10. And if somebody put a 4 or a 5 as they were doing their morning work routine, I'd walk around and say, can you tell me why you put a 4 or 5? And sometimes they would tell me they had a fight with their brother or sister. Sometimes they say, I don't want to talk about it, but I gave them an option. And then at lunchtime, I erased all those numbers. And then when they came back from lunchtime, they would check in again, because lunchtime for fifth graders can be cruel and brutal. And sometimes they'd be a 10 in the morning and a 2 when they got back from lunch. It's like, okay, what happened during lunch?
Mm-hmm.
So then we would talk about it. And when I talked to parents, I didn't use the jargon that educators use. And so, it's like when I go to the doctor, it's like, tell me in layman's terms, what's going on with this? I have a bone spur on the top of my foot right now. And it's like, okay, tell me what that means and what I need to do to make it less painful. And when I meet with a parent, and if we're doing an IEPC, I don't talk about all of the jargon that everybody else around that round table can talk about.
Just by talking to you, I can just feel the passion you have for teaching still to this day. How did you translate that into kids becoming passionate about learning?
Well, back to that fifth grade, I said I couldn't teach sixth grade because I looked at the math curriculum and it was just, I didn't understand. They didn't do fractions and division the way I learned, back in the. So I had 3 young men in my fifth grade class, Ricky, Ryan, and Christopher. And they were in the avant-garde program, which was even higher than AT. And I was sweating bullets trying to teach this math lesson. And they said, just sit down, we'll teach it. And it was like, okay. And when I would make a mistake, I would tell my students, I don't know all the answers. And that's, and it's okay. Is that I have to be learning too. And that's why I'm going to college. That's why I'm going on. I got a 4-year degree, but I'm going on. And one of the things we encourage staff members to hang up their shingles, their diplomas in their classroom, so the students could see what you get for all those years of study and the pride that you get from having that diploma when you're done. The other thing was the first year, I taught fifth grade. Because I was a vocal music major, growing up, you had to do band or choir. You couldn't do both. And I always wanted to learn how to play an instrument. And so my fifth graders, I had many of them who signed up for band. And I said, you know what? This will be my opportunity. So in fact, the band teacher went to Olivet with me. And I said, hey, Roger, I'm going to sign up for band. He goes, what? I said, yeah, when my kids come, we're all coming down the hall to play. And so I learned how to play the oboe as 40-something old with my fifth graders. And there was one kid who held out. He said, you can't make me play band. I said, okay, you have an extra spelling assignment every Tuesday and Thursday. When we march down to band, you're going to sit in the back on the floor and do a spelling assignment. So I showed my students that I could learn something new too. And I hope that that's one of the things I instilled in them is that, so often, like I didn't want to know I didn't want my principal to know my name growing up, but I wanted my students to say, yeah, she's going to sit and read with us. She's going to work on this problem, and she might not get it right the first time, but Ricky and Christopher and Ryan will show her how to do it.
I actually love that. You're also being kind of transparent and vulnerable. And you're like, I don't know it, but I still want you to learn it. Talking to you, I'm now thinking, and I'm sure, Michelle, you're the same way. I'm thinking about my grade school experience and even high school. And it's funny because like I will admit I was like a C student in high school. I don't know if I applied myself as much as I probably could have or should have. I don't know why, because I certainly liked the school experience. But here's what I will say. I finally got serious about college probably my senior year. And it wasn't until college where I really fell in love with learning. So for something clicked in me. And maybe it was because I was realizing, oh, A, I got to be an adult. But B, I got to pay for school now. So that's kind of maybe get really serious about my education. But ultimately, something clicked in me, Joan, and I don't know what it was, but I just have a passion. Ever since then, I've had a passion for learning. But
well, I wonder.
I think I had some really good teachers too in college. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think having good teachers in college helps. Yeah. But I also think maybe it was more of a choice to learn. You took more ownership of that because I think, in elementary and high school, middle, it's like you have to. You have to sit there. You have to learn.
Yeah.
It's mostly like something's being imposed on me. You're also at a developmental level where it feels like, everyone's telling you what to do all the time. And so having the freedom in college to decide if you want to learn or not, you chose that, yes, you do.
Yeah. Joan?
That friend of yours, the 22-year-old, I'd ask them, so who were the educators that made a difference?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can rattle off the teachers that I had through the years that made a difference for me. And I'm hopeful that my name would come up in conversation of the thousands of students I had over those 25 years. Was my name in there somewhere? Did I make a difference?
Yeah.
I recall a college professor who was in the communications department. She was outstanding. I do remember her. Oh, I'll tell you one story. I had a counselor tell me, because I think my major was, at that point, I decided to go into like broadcasting or television. And this person told me, I'll never get a job. He said, you will never get a job. I'm like, really? I'm like, that's not how I see it, but okay, that's your opinion. And I tell you what, that counselor lit a fire under my ass so much that I transferred schools and I got a job. I've had plenty of jobs since then.
When I was a sophomore, one of my professors, I had long hair down to the bottom of my bottom. And he said, you'll never get a job if you don't cut your hair. And I said, it shouldn't matter how long my hair is. He goes, I'm telling you, you will not get hired. You look too young and you will not get a job. So I did. I ended up cutting my hair to shoulder length. And it was more out of being more efficient in the morning than dealing with this long hair. And I didn't do it because of him, but you're right. It lit a fire under me. Like, you can't tell me because I have long hair, I'm not going to get a job. Mm-hmm. But I also thought I'm not going to be silly enough to not think from somebody who's a professor. And I was subbing and I wore a blouse, a skirt. And that was back when you put a little bow on the top of your blouse. And the administrator walked into the high school classroom and said, where's the sub? And I went, that would be me. But the rest of the time, I tried to make sure that I looked the part. So when I was a teacher, I looked the part. And when I was an administrator, I took it up to the next notch you if the superintendent popped in, if I had an important meeting with a parent that all of a sudden came up. So you try and make sure that you're at the level that you need to be successful also.
They say dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Isn't that right?
Yeah, sometimes. Although one of the things I used to do was is if I was having a very challenging day, and we had walkie-talkies because the building was so large, it was a former junior high. I would tell my secretaries, if you really need me, but otherwise I'm going down to the dance studio. And I would go down and I would dance with whatever class was in there just to get away from the office for 15 or 20 minutes and just go down and dance with the children. And they would remember that. So rather than getting in my car and driving around the block 10 times, I would just go down to the dance studio and dance with the students.
I'm thinking back to the teachers that I could name that were impactful to me, and they have the same attributes, Joan, that you're describing, like that they, had humor and fun. They were human. They seemed to care. What happened to me, there was more of a like feeling like they were actually invested and not just, sending students through the machine. I don't care. I'm just here for the money.
Well, and you drive by any parking lot on a Sunday afternoon, and that parking lot is filled with cars.
Mm-hmm.
Those teachers are not getting paid by the hour.
No.
They're salaried, and they're there on weekends. They're there in the evenings. They're already thinking this summer while they're on summer vacation. When people say, "Oh yeah, teachers have it bad, 9 to 3, 9 months out of the year," it's like, no, you have no clue. Because they're even thinking about their students when they're driving home and all evening long when they're grading papers. Like, how can I make a difference? How can I get their attendance up? How can I let that parent know that I'm in their corner and stop beating up on their kid?
That's why I wish there were more administrators like Joan, because the stories we hear now are of teachers maybe not being mistreated necessarily. That might be a harsh word, but certainly feeling quite powerless and overworked and underappreciated and all of those things. And I know in my kids' school, I've had some disappointing interactions with administration, feeling like they don't have the teachers' backs. And I don't know, as a parent, I'm just curious if you would have any advice how a parent can advocate on behalf of teachers, or how do parents best support the teachers?
So when a teacher would come to me, Michelle, and would say, "I'm having trouble with this one parent or this one child," I'd always say, "And what have you done so far?" Or if a parent calls me to complain about the teacher, I'd say, "And what have you done with the teacher so far?" I'd push it back because they really are the ones that make the difference day in and day out. It's not me who comes in for a half-hour meeting with the two of them and try and work it out. And so I always would ask the teacher, "What have you done so far to help this parent understand?" Or to the parent, "What have you done with the teacher? Have you written notes? Have you tried to be communicating?" That's how I would start. And then sometimes I would have to bring them in and we'd have to have a conversation. But that's where they need to start, Michelle, is the parent has to start with the teacher has to start. And sometimes parents would require or request to have their child move to another classroom. And what I'd say is, we can look at that, but not today. What I want you to work on, the next 2 weeks, and then we'll revisit this. Because too often, you just throw up your hands and quit. Or the parent just wants their child moved to another classroom. And I'd say, but you're not giving Miss Jones an opportunity here to make changes in how she's teaching or how she's dealing with John's behavior. So therefore, give Miss Jones 2 weeks and then let's reevaluate. So it wasn't that I was pushing it down the tin can down the road, it was that let's let them know that you just can't quit and give up. It is that you've got to try and make solutions to what's the issue here? What is the issue? Are they tired? Are they ill? Is a divorce going on at home? Is the material too difficult? Do they need glasses? So why is it that they're misbehaving? Is it because there's something else going on?
Yeah. In our profession, we say behavior is communication. It's trying to tell you something.
Even like the sleepy kids, we know that that's a sign of something's going on because there's something they're missing in their home life.
It's tough though, because I'm coming from a perspective of, I want to support the teacher. I want to advocate for a teacher. But I see some parents who behave very poorly and have really unrealistic expectations. And I'm sure you have some horror stories, Joan, of some parents.
Or parents who think their kids could do no wrong.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure happens all the time, right?
If I had 2 children that are fighting out on the playground, and with that, if that happens, they get suspended for a day. So the parent would come in and say, "So what happened to the other kid?" And I'd say, "You know what? I don't tell the parent of the other child what your child's punishment is. And so therefore, I'm not sharing that information with you." So, you're not going to play that game with me. And I lost my cool one time with one parent the first year I was principal. It was a first grader. He continued to fight on the playground. And I kept calling her to come pick him up. And she arrived at school with a belt. And she started to whip her son in the hallway. And I yelled for my behaviors person, and I yelled for my secretary to call 911. And she told me, she said, if you can't deal with his behavior, then I'll deal with it for you. And I broke apart into, I was just a mess. And I said, never again would I lose my composure in front of a parent. I would wait until the situation was over.
Yeah. What gives you hope now, looking forward with teaching or with kids in general?
There are bright children out there. We attended my husband's niece's graduation. I attended my own granddaughter's graduation down in Ohio in May. To see the ability and the tenacity to get through COVID and to still learn and to still graduate and to still have dreams, it does. It gives me hope. And when I go and see my younger grandchildren and ask them to tell me about their school day, or I accompany them on their field trips, it gives me hope that, there are educators who still are passionate and who still want to teach, and that will instill in others. It's just like police officers, that's not a job I'm thrilled that my son is in. However, my grandson wants to become a police officer. So, and whether it is being a counselor or being in television or broadcasting or podcasting, is that whatever you do, you want to just do it to the best of your ability. And that's going to happen with all of those children one way or another. They're going to have somebody that lights that fire, like you said, Kelly.
I think, yeah, especially if somebody has passion for something, doesn't matter what it is, you can see it. It comes through. And if a teacher has that, they're going to have their good days and bad days. But ultimately, it sounds like you had that, clearly. Hopefully we have a next good crop of kids coming in to teaching profession.
Well, one of the things I used to tell my students when I worked with them from Western is we did mock interviews at the end of the semester. And they not always would do real well. And so I thought, okay, how can I help them be more prepared for their first job interview for teaching? And I told them, so this was after several semesters of being a coordinator, I said, I want you to come up with a 30-second advertisement of yourself. So you got on an elevator with somebody and they tell you, oh, hey, I'm looking for a second grade teacher. You've got 30 seconds to sell yourself. And from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester, how they flourished, because they would all say, I've always loved children. I always played school as a kid. My mom was an educator. My grandmother thought I'd be a good, I said, you have got to market yourself. So what sets you apart from all of the other applicants that are out there? And for a long time, when I got back into education in 83, you could not get it. I was the only one who graduated from Olivet who got a job teaching in Michigan. Everybody else went to Arizona. They went to Texas because there were no music jobs to be had in Michigan. And so for a while, teachers were a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
And now, like you said, Kelly, there are fewer men who are going into education, and you're more apt to be hired. But you still need to market yourself that you're the best candidate for that job. And so I would tell my student teachers, by the end of the semester, you need to have that 30-second commercial of yourself down to a T. What set you apart? Was it because you tutored after school at the Boys and Girls Club? Was it because you taught Vacation Bible School all summer long? Was it because whatever it is, you've got to sell yourself that you're a better candidate than the next person who comes in behind you.
Two things I wanted to ask you. One is, do you believe in tenure for teachers? And two is just, are you able to turn the educator off? Like now that you're not in that role, it's still there though, right? That's how you know you're passionate.
Always there.
Yeah.
Even with my grandchildren, it never goes away.
Yeah.
And once in a while I'm asked to preach at church, and I just go back into my objective was, what do I want the congregation to walk away with at the end? When I run a committee meeting, I'm still the educator. Mm-hmm. Tenure, in the university world, it's different than in the education world. And I think it's wise in Kalamazoo, at least, you must stay in that same building your first 3 years so that you're not being moved around. If you're not being effective, is that you're not being put into another situation where another administrator has to get to know you. So the idea is to have a first year teacher mentored by somebody else who is a veteran teacher. And I was doing that when I was a fifth grade teacher. I was mentoring other first year teachers. And I really enjoyed that, giving them the ins and the outs, like that spiral notebook with the child's name at the top. And every time you contacted the parent or they sent in cookies, you wrote that down, because then it's such an easy thing to do at the end of the day. But I thought of something else, but the tenure, I think it's important. In most folks, either they decided that it's for them or not for them after 3 years. And it's unfortunate. I know a couple of folks who taught several years in one district and then for whatever reason moved to another district, and the years don't always transfer over. So then because we're on a level of pay this way, and then you go across. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you're here. If you have a bachelor's plus 15, you're here. If you have a bachelor's and master's, you're here. So there's pay grades across the way. But once you get to like 20 years, this is back when I retired, you didn't get a step increase every year. You might get a percentage, the 1.5% or whatever it is, but teachers are not paid what they're worth. Let me tell you.
No,
I agree.
No,
I agree.
No.
Yeah.
The other thing I thought about was when Columbine happened, I was in California and I heard about what happened. And of course, my first thought was to my own personal children. And then I thought about my children at school. And I was grateful we were flying home the next day, because I just could not wait to get back to my students. And it just saddens me to no end when they talk about arming teachers.
Yeah.
It saddens me to no end that we have, and this is when I was still in the building, we had to do lockdowns. And that was before there were these mass shootings all the times in school. I never had to deal with that. One time we had a lockdown because there was a bank robbery down the street. And so we locked down the building. But it wasn't an imminent threat. And it was the custodian and I who had to walk through the halls. And I said, I didn't sign up for this. Did you sign up for this? And his answer was no. When we took that job, we weren't getting extra pay because we were putting ourselves out there. But then the flip side is I wouldn't want anybody else out in that hallway. I wanted my teachers inside with the classrooms, keeping them safe.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way after 9/11. That Tuesday, I went through the halls and I told my teachers, you do not turn those televisions on. You do not say anything. The district is coming up with a letter. We're sending it home with the children at the end of the day. And I had one teacher who had the gall to turn on her TV during lunch, and there were children in the hallway. So it was just her in her classroom, but the door was open. And I said, I was furious. I wrote her up. I said, the lounge TV is on. You can go in there and watch it in the lounge. The children are not to know what's going on.
Yeah.
The next day, I had 3 parents who did not send their children to school. And I called them and they said, I just couldn't send my child in good faith today. And I said, I understand your concern. However, I sent my 2 children to school. So they have an excused absence for today, but I expect them to be in school tomorrow on Thursday because I will be here keeping them safe.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, like when you say, would you go back? I don't know for the technology piece, for the way that the curriculum has changed, and also for the whole safety issue. It's just,
No,
it's hard.
I mean, you shouldn't, as a teacher, have to worry about that, but you do have to worry about that, I guess, nowadays,
Yeah,
right?
you don't have the luxury of not worrying about it because it's a thing
Mm-hmm.
that exists. But that door of uncertainty that got opened in these kids' brains now when they have to do active shooter drills and all of that in their schools, like you can't take that back. You can't unring the bell of a child now knowing that that's a possibility for them.
Well, and
You
it's
know?
not just schools too. It's churches. It's grocery stores. So look, this is a whole different episode. Obviously, you're dealing with fear, right? And you're dealing with uncertainty in the classroom setting, which is certainly a problem for the learning environment.
Absolutely. If your brain doesn't feel safe,
It was what I used to tell my children is that once they left their home and they were on their way to school, they were my responsibility.
well, all of my school nightmares are all about like missing the bus or, forgetting about a test or not being able to find my classroom.
I still have nightmares to this day about missing a test
Yeah.
in college. Isn't that crazy?
It's pretty normal.
I must have missed some tests though, because I think I did miss one test.
And it haunts you to this day.
It does. It does. I'm scarred.
Yeah, as we wrap up, I do want to go back, Joan, to that picturing teachers in the wild, because that's always the funniest thing when a kid sees a teacher like at the drugstore and realizes in that moment that they're the human being. It's so funny.
They think you live at school.
Yeah.
And then they say, then I say, well, this is my son and this is my daughter. It's like, they're kids.
Yeah.
And it's like, you belong to me. You can't belong to anybody else.
Yep.
Yeah. Especially for elementary. I know in middle school and high school, that's not the case. But in elementary school, they literally believe that you live, eat, and sleep at that school 24/7. And we had students, unfortunately, the last day of school would let out. And an hour later, they'd be back. Can we do this? Can we help out? They don't want to be home. They want to be at school. Because we were reliable. We were always there. We'd listen. We cared. We didn't, it just,
You're giving them something that they might be getting from at home on a consistent basis.
Yes.
I think this has been great, Joan. I really appreciate you coming on the pod. We both appreciate you coming on the podcast. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much. And again, I was just so delighted to get your perspective and your wisdom. And yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Please. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah. What a great lady. Can I just say that?
Yeah. I wish all my principals and teachers were like Joan.
I know. Well, I wish for the sake of teachers that they have administrators like her.
Yeah. If there were more like her, I think it would make a big difference in people who go into teaching.
Yeah, I would say whether it's teaching or the work that I do or firefighters or any of these helping professions where, you see a lot of hard stuff during the day, one of the protective factors against burnout or to help mitigate burnout is having a supportive supervisor, administrator, someone at the head who you feel has your back and understands the work that you do and is supporting you through that.
She touched a little bit on inspiring that passion for learning, not only for teachers, but from students.
I agree with you. I think, a lot of teaching has become, teach to the exams or make things standardized. And, those schools where kids are allowed to really develop critical thinking skills and social emotional skills, in addition to that academic work. That's where a student can become just a more well-rounded person and succeed in their academic career as well.
What was that movie with Robin Williams?
Dead Poets.
Dead Poet Society, yeah. I think back to Robin Williams' character in Dead Poet Society and just how inspiring he was to those students. And that was obviously college, but...
Yeah, someone inspirational, someone who wants you to think for yourself.
We also talked about the relationship between teachers and parents and how difficult that can be. And you're obviously a parent.
Well, I think when you said balance, that's where you're trying to head is like, how do you have that balance? And whenever you work with a kid in any capacity, you kind of have to work with the caregivers because the kid doesn't exist in a vacuum. So, the caregivers not at some point, they have a lot of influence over how that kid behaves and how that kid feels. Yeah, I find when I work with kids or teens or really any age of child, I am really needing to spend time with the caregivers or the parents and ask for some adjustments on their end as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been in a situation where it's only the child who has to, change a behavior or do something differently in order for everything to be okay again. I don't envy teachers having to deal with parents who, like we talked about on the show, have high expectations or, don't take accountability for their children or, think somehow a teacher is supposed to be a miracle worker. Hopefully those teachers are getting, again, support from their administration to be well trained and kind of feel like they can have hard yet honest conversations with parents.
Well, hopefully some teachers or some parents heard this conversation today and they can walk away with some inspiration a little bit, because certainly I did.
Yeah. And what I like is you may think, hey, we're a podcast that deals with relationships. Like, how does this fit in? But during the show, you saw all the ways and all the different relationships that emerge from a teacher and a student, a teacher and a parent, a teacher and an administration, a student's relationship with their own learning. It's absolutely about relationships when you're talking about teaching and kids' trajectory in life academically.
A teacher can have such a huge impact on a kid's life, and a positive or negative, but usually positive. So that's that relationship. I would argue the teacher-student relationship is maybe one of the most important relationships in our lives.
Yes, especially early on in those formative years when kids are either excited about learning or not, or discouraged about learning or not. Having a good teacher is going to be critical for setting the path for them. Mm-hmm. And I would also say, like you pointed out, in college, you had some inspiring professors that kind of changed your trajectory because it's clicked something in you. Mm-hmm. And I'm shocked that you said you were not a very good student or that you weren't a very curious person, because that's like one of the first traits I list when I describe you to people. Like, loves to learn about things, so curious about life, has a zest for learning.
I don't think I was a bad student. I just don't think I think I cared too much about sports, cared too much about girls, cared way too much about my friends. I don't know. I don't think I was. Okay. I don't think I was doing my best. I was a hard worker. I had jobs after school, and I was,
But it doesn't sound like you were particularly interested in learning. It certainly wasn't a priority, because all those other things were. Yeah.
I remember all the other moments, the proms. I remember some of the games. I remember a lot of stuff. I don't remember in classroom environment.
Well, yeah, but also, what is our expectation? Kids, do we expect them to love going to school and to learn? That feels kind of unreasonable for the most part. It's very restraining, especially for little kids to have to sit and be quiet and focus. I think a lot of times we're being really unrealistic about what our expectations are for kiddos, for the little ones at least. But school is a place where they can develop those skills, certainly. But to expect, a kindergartner to sit for 3 hours and learn math.
What's inspiring is doing this podcast and learning.
I know.
I learned so much from this podcast. And so this is the part where we remind people to reach out to us, email us, come on the podcast.
Yeah. And teach us something.
If you're struggling with family, friends, or coworkers, in a bad relationship and wondering what to do, or you want a relationship and to set yourself up for success, then we want to talk to you. So make your appointment on Unrelating. To be a guest, ask a question, or recommend a topic, drop us an email at theunrelatingpodcast@gmail.com. And be sure to follow us on Instagram or Facebook.